How did you become a crew chief? Or well, like actually, let's go back even further. I know you grew up in Alabama. Were you part of a racing family? Like, were you in a town that was a hotbed for racing? Like, what's your sort of origin story for getting into racing there?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting one, and I'll give you the treetop version. Yeah, Birmingham, Alabama, known for the Allisons. You know, Hueytown, Alabama, just right outside of Birmingham, where Bobby and Donnie Allison, Davey Allison, Red Farmer, the Alabama gang was from. But I came from no racing background whatsoever. I
Okay.
was an only child, and my parents could care less about automobile racing. Don't even know if we ever even turned it on the TV, what little it was broadcast back then. But my aunt, who was more really like a sister to me, because she was the baby of the family, my mom's sister, she's only 10 years older than I am. And my grandfather, my mom's dad, they were race fans. And the local racetrack, short track, was only about a 10-minute walk from where my grandparents lived. And every Friday night, my grandfather, my aunt, myself would walk down the hill and go to the track, BIR, Birmingham International Raceway, on Friday night, and we watched the local short track races every Friday night. And then my aunt got married, and this would have been about 1975. I was still in high school, like maybe a sophomore, but my aunt got married and her husband was a race fan. So the four of us every Friday night. Well, my aunt also was a little bit of a hot rodder. And there was this one night they started a brand new division called a street stock hobby division. It was as stock of a race car as you could probably build, had a one little page of rules. Excuse me. You knock the windows out, you put the fuel tank up in the trunk, put some roll bars in it and a door number on it, and you had your race car. Well, the first night they started this, my aunt looked at her husband and said, I bet I could do that. Well, her husband, kind of tongue in cheek, said, well, I tell you what, go out and find some sponsors and we'll build you a race car. He was a mechanic by trade.
Okay.
Well, she called his bluff, and I'm sure a little bit being a lady in a man's world of racing, she went out and found more sponsors than we could almost put on that race car. So my racing career started in their basement, building a street stock hobby car. And honestly, I didn't know a 3/4 wrench from a lug nut. But my uncle did a really nice job. I was his only help he had, of teaching me, and we did this for about 2 years. Didn't have a lot of success. I don't know how talented she really was, and we probably didn't have the money to buy all the right stuff that we needed.
Yeah.
But racing is like a disease. It gets in your bloodstream and there's no getting it out. And I started working for a super late model racer locally, a gentleman by the name of Bobby Ray Jones that owned a late model car. And he had a driver that drove it, Richard Orton. Eventually, Dave Mater III drove it. I started helping them again as a volunteer. I worked in a junkyard during the day, Monday through Friday, and I would go work on these race cars every night, sometimes all night until time to go back to work the next day. And then we'd race all over the Southeast, uh, pretty much throughout the weekend and late spring, summer, and early fall. And we had a lot of success. We won a lot of races. So now I'm bitten pretty good by the racing bug. I want to make a living doing it. And I kind of figured out that it probably was not going to happen in Birmingham, Alabama. There just were no NASCAR teams located in Birmingham, Alabama. So I answered a classified ad that was in the NASCAR newsletter that came out every month about a new NASCAR Cup Series team that was starting in Greenville, South Carolina. And so I called, and a lady actually answered the phone. It was the owner's daughter that was taking the phone calls. She actually knew who I was because we had raced against them in late models. And they were starting a brand new team. Her dad with a local racer there around Greenville. And she called me back a few weeks later and said, why don't you come up and work with us the rest of this year? This would have been August, September of 1980. And she said, we're going to run 3 or 4 races the end of this year and then run the full schedule in 81. She said, why don't you come up here and work for us on an interim basis, see if you like us, see if we like you, and we'll go from there. So I went up there and worked for a few weeks, and they came to me and said, Larry, absolutely, we want you to go to work full time. And I thought I had died and went to heaven. I was actually going to get to work on race cars. It was my way of making a living, and I was going to get paid for doing it. And in the morning, that's where I was going, was the race shop to work. But I remember coming back to Birmingham to get my stuff, and I had a 1971 green Pinto. When I say green, you've never seen a green like this thing. When I hooked the U-Haul behind it, before I ever even put anything in it, the rear bumper was already almost dragging the ground. But I remember my mom and dad, again, being an only child, my mom and dad looked at me and said, this is the craziest thing we've ever seen. You'll be back in 6 months. You'll be broke and you'll be hungry. We'll feed you, but we're not going to bail you out of debt. And as much as I always respected my mom and dad, I said, you know what? You guys are probably right, but I have to go try this. This is my dream. It may end up being the worst thing I've ever tried or done in my life, but I got to go try it. And my mom and dad are both deceased, but by the time they passed away, my dad passed away in 90 and my mom in 95. There were not two bigger race fans than my mom and dad, simply because of what I went on to accomplish.